One,
That's
two, three, four,
100%.
five. Whoa, 1, 2, 3, 4. I can stand back here now. It's going to whistle at me for a minute. How's that? That okay? The interest has always pleased me. I bought my first model railroad HO Pacific Electric car in 1950 up here at the whistle stop. And I've been fiddling with these things ever since. My story is my take on the Pacific Electric, not necessarily one you read in every book, with which there are many. When I was 4 years old, 1929, it was a period when our milk was still arriving by horse-drawn wagon in Los Angeles. Our 4 mules hauled our garbage away in a municipal wagon, but it was really the end of that era, and just past the peak of the electric trolley. And youngsters such as I, our family did not have a car, had to learn how to get around on those things, and my mother made it quite simple. We took a ride or two up to nursery school at the old UCLA campus on North Vermont, which was the end of that line. And subsequently, she took me over to Vermont, handed me to the motorman, and said he's going to the end of the line to nursery school, and they're waiting for him. That was it. I was not surprised to have a couple of people come up a year and a half ago when I was giving this talk and say, my mom did the same thing. You learn to read a little bit too. On the streetcar was a sign I paid no attention to. It said, unnecessary conversation with the motorman is prohibited. Do you remember that sign? And there was another one, a holdover from a little rougher era, that said, do not expectorate on the floor. Later that year, from another apartment, I could see across a quarter mile of vacant lots to today's San Vicente Boulevard. This is the tracks going up San Vicente. The street crossing you see ahead of you is Wilshire Boulevard. Now, why wasn't your family with it? The rumbling trains I could hear during the night, and I could see the lights because I was looking across a lot of vacant lots out there. And they caught my attention, and obviously they still do. At that time, my father began his lifetime career at Bullock's. Now, some of you must remember Bullock's. Huh? And the tea rooms where, well, many of you might have gotten your manners, the lesson in manners around the table. Dad's promotion started us moving, and we came east to Alhambra, southwest Pasadena, and ultimately to San Marino, but we were never very far from maybe a 5-minute walk to a rent car. It just seemed incredible. They were everywhere. That was a good thing, too, because as I said, we were without an automobile till I was 6. Yet all of our serious shopping was accomplished downtown. We don't talk about downtown anymore. We went downtown to go shopping, where Barker Brothers and Robinsons and May Company and Silverwoods and Bullock's, they didn't have suburban stores in those days. The first suburban store in the United States was Bullock's Pasadena in 1947. A huge success, and by the way, it was not built to become a hotel if it wasn't successful. That's one of the rumors around town. Many shoppers came from all over Southern California, as they could, on the Pacific Electric, dressed like this, getting on these big cars, furs and hats and gloves, to shop at Bullock's Pasadena. They could come from Pomona, from Newport Beach, from San Fernando, everywhere, and get right off in front of the store. How did all that happen? I'm a foresighted man, he said, and I believe Los Angeles is destined to become the most important city in this country. It can extend in any direction as far as you like. This is our friend Mr. Huntington. My favorite picture of him, he's standing there with Joseph Devine, who sold him all the art you see over in the museum. It can extend in any direction, and that's what he proceeded to do. In 1898, he had invested in the LA Railway Company, what many of us called the Yellow Car, and began purchasing land here. Upon the passing of his Uncle Collis in 1900, Henry was squeezed out of his former prominence at the SP and turned his attention to Southern California. He arrived here with advantages that not many newcomers were able to bring with them. He had very considerable old railway experience all across the country. He worked for his uncle, He knew who to gather with him. The great engineer, S.B. Randolph, who did most of his planning on the maps that you see. And he came here with money. That helped. Here's the kind of thing he could foresee looking on the maps. Excuse me. I don't think he envisioned this, though. Isn't that something? Spread all over. Where you can, when you fly in from someplace and come in at night and see that, it's a wonderful sight. He was essentially becoming a real estate developer, and the Pacific Electric would be his means of getting buyers out to his properties and irritating the Southern Pacific whenever he could. Now, that map that we looked at, there's a fine line on those maps, and that's the steam engine lines running down, and the main lines are the Pacific Electric as it was constructed. Most of the to the right of the main line going to Long Beach, most to the right is what Huntington developed. To the left is basically what he took over and corrected to his standards. Now, there had been plenty of transportation startups around. Some are like this. This is in Ontario. Ontario has quite a slope downhill to the valley, as does Monrovia, and they both had this kind of car. Now, these mules or horses pulled the car uphill, and there was enough of the slope that they could put the horses on the dolly in the back, and everybody rode downhill with no effort whatsoever. There was a cable car in Los Angeles. Now, that didn't last too long, but it was pretty expensive to use, and streetcars started to appear. I remember streetcars with great open sections like that, and riding in the kind of weather we've had recently, it was pretty cool to do that. Kind of freeze a little bit. Excuse me. Most of them struggled financially, very seriously. Even the Los Angeles and Pacific, operating out to Santa Monica, it was established in 1894. I'm getting ahead of myself here. It was established in 1894 by General Moses Sherman, and the public called that Sherman's March to the Sea, as you thought they might. The inaugural day of that service was a holiday, so the kids could welcome the train to Santa Monica. Many of you have stepped over these rails as you crossed Exposition Boulevard over the years to reach the Natural History Museum or the Coliseum, and that, of course, is the very line being reactivated today. Steam railways had been here for some time, but Huntington was impressed by the success of the Los Angeles and Pasadena Railway, a narrow-gauge electric line, which was stealing passenger business from the steam trains that had been coming to Pasadena. He made it his first purchase in 1902. The line's route to Pasadena excuse me, was by way of North Figueroa Street, originally known as Pasadena Avenue. He went to Highland Park, and just before York Boulevard, it turned east and went across this track, and is following and could look down on the sharp S-turn we have in the Pasadena Freeway today as you approach Pasadena. It turned east across the Arroyo on this, what for the time was a rather spectacular bridge. Look at the frigid open sections. If you were lucky and got on first, you could sit in the middle section and be a little warmer. This line was a typical one for him. He put a branch in. This is looking up, of all things, Avenue 64. The car is sitting at where York Boulevard crosses. This thing went all the way up past La Loma Road, the famous church up there in Hillsides, to this rather desolate-looking site. But on the right is Annandale Golf Course first clubhouse. Now, Mr. Huntington owned the land, about all the land you could see from that point. Poppy Peak, San Rafael, all that sort of thing, was held by the Huntington Land and Development Company. He was always ahead of the building of the rail. The route that this branched off of served South Pasadena until 1935. But early on, Huntington decided he needed a shorter route to Pasadena, and here I'm going to show you Hollywood Boulevard where we're changing. I want you to notice that all the streets of that day were dirt. They're maintained, but they're dirt. he decided he needed a shorter route to Pasadena. So he cut the one starting down by the General Hospital. Thank you, I could use that. Up to the left in this picture, if you could stand and look up to the left, is the General Hospital. In this line, if you followed the line out of the picture, you'd end up on Huntington Boulevard at Mission Road. So he wanted to serve Temple City, Sierra Madre, San Marino, and points east by putting this line through. Here's El Sereno. Now, many of you today, if you drive to General Hospital, you drive down this track, only it's paved today. El Sereno, all the way through there is a four-track width. And it was always thought of as being actually the prime way that railroads could be built for inter-urban use. Here it is on Huntington Drive. This train is approaching Alhambra Road after leaving Fremont around the curve in back of it. Some of you will certainly remember that. The first trolley line that was completely a Huntington concept was the one to Long Beach, where he, of course, had substantial landholdings. He was credited with access to much of the coast from Santa Monica to Newport Beach and large areas of the San Gabriel Valley and the 3 counties of Orange, San Bernardino, and Riverside. July 4th, 1902, his trolleys running every 15 minutes brought 30,000 visitors to Long Beach. Long Beach had a village population of 2,400 at the time. They had traveled across flat, empty countryside, whizzing past Compton. This is Dominguez Junction, and is interest to me because up to the left on the hill, to the left, is Dominguez Hill, the location of the first air meet in the United States in 1910. Attending there was 14-year-old Jimmy Doolittle.
Where'd you go? Irene.
This is on battery.
Your computer?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe if you plug it in, then
Can you get your computer plugged in? You want to put your computer on off battery and plug it in?
Do what?
Plug your computer in so you're not using battery.
That's what I'm trying to do here, yeah.
there's a plug somewhere.
Right behind you in the wall. I think that'll work. Coming on. My computer guru assured me I had 3 hours and 17 minutes on here.
Did your battery die? Is that what
Now,
happened?
now it's on the system.
So your battery's okay.
Well,
It's plugged in.
we're now on on
I wonder if we hit a button here. Let's see. Podium PC.
we've hit something there.
No controls are available. Projector on. Are we still plugged in?
It's plugged in now. It's running now.
He's just.
No, he's working here, so I don't think it's just the battery.
Well, we're online now.
It always says it.
Here we go. I'm back where we were. Okay.
Good job.
And the intermission is over.
Yeah. First, we got to get this to go. Let's see. It's hung up. The computer's hung up somehow.
Where's your
All it does is bing.
battery kick?
Mhm.
It's not accepting it.
It just goes bing.
Well, let's
It might
just,
just be an audio. No pictures. You have to continue.
try it, I'll shut it down and restart it.
All right.
Let's just do that. It's not even doing that. Okay, go to escape.
Is that it?
I don't know if that's what he started.
Yeah. All right, thank you. This line had just 6 curves in it, and took about 20 minutes, 23 minutes to go to Long Beach. People traveled across a flat, empty countryside, as you could see, whizzing past Compton, population 424. With just 6 curves and a 1% grade, the project sounds pretty easy, except for the 14 trestles built to cross the river and the swamps that were in that part of the country. Huntington was a true railroad man, and so were the people that worked with him. His lines were built with heavy standard gauge track, which enabled him to effectively compete with Southern Pacific and Santa Fe for the important freight business. But he was also interested in building up, this is the line going up the Oak Knoll. The little white street lights you see in the back are Monterey Road. And the line went up to the Huntington Hotel, which you see on the upper left side of the picture. This line turned just after crossing Granada, went behind Redford's house, didn't it? Almost. And he was also putting, this is the line coming up Lake Avenue and turning west on Colorado Street. Now here it is, the car is just coming down from the entrance to the Huntington Hotel. The right-of-way, the private right-of-way, is occupying half the street that you use today. And I have to remark here that the right-of-ways were often looking quite untidy. If they fixed them up, they came by with a burning car and burned the weeds, and that didn't look very good. And people were throwing paper on it and all kinds of stuff. If you stood there and watched the car come by and you turned left to follow it, you had this view, which I had tonight coming down here. This street hasn't changed here right at all. You're just dumping down to Old Mill Road. That's what it looked like, not only today, but 18 years ago when I took this picture. He was building down to Santa Ana. He was building to Monrovia. He was building out to Covina. I want to point out the uniform on that conductor. That's not the typical uniform you may remember, but this is about 1907 in there. They were very proud people, proud employees. And my father, raised in Ontario, said that these men, on the Sunday afternoons when families would take the porch furniture and put it out on the lawn, no TV to watch, you know. Why, one of the guys everybody listened to was the conductor on the Pacific Electric. He got into town every day. He was talking to people who mattered. So his opinion was highly considered. This is your intersection here in San Marino, Huntington Drive, and there's the car about to roll back up to Sierra Madre Boulevard. In 1905, he purchased the Redondo and Los Angeles Electric, and in response, the Southern Pacific purchased Sherman's March to the Sea to contain him in that direction. His other ideas, like a line to San Diego and Santa Ana, were discouraged by Mr. Harriman, who suspected that a competitive line to San Francisco, what he's had in mind. Now, Huntington's investors, I might have said, we might have skipped it there, they got a little annoyed with him because their bonds weren't paying off. So they very quietly sold their interest to Mr. Harriman. And Mr. Huntington all of a sudden had quite an unwelcome partner slowing him down. And during that period, he started the Los Angeles Interurban Railway Company and used the finances of that corporation to order rail cars to run on the Pacific Electric line and continue adding to his Pacific Electric plan. At that time, he also acquired existing trolleys out in Riverside and San Bernardino counties. He got this Redondo in Los Angeles Electric. Mr. Harriman was getting kind of annoyed with him, so what they call the Great Feud ensued. It was more a business feud than a personal feud. Huntington had the idea, on the LA yellow cars, as we called them, to extend the 6th Street franchise in Los Angeles. And Harriman, just to be a nuisance, sent somebody down to outbid Huntington every time he opened his mouth. So instead of it being available for probably $6,500, the price got to $100,000. Mr. Huntington got the point. He was up against a wall he couldn't climb. He went immediately to San Francisco, and he and Mr. Harriman worked out a deal. Huntington could continue, if he was a good boy, planning on his Pacific Electric and all. And he also could keep they got a plan together to where he would lease the entire Pacific Electric system to the Southern Pacific. And in return, he would keep the entire yellow car system, and his interest did until the 1940s. The red car system he sold slowly began to show its true colors, which was red ink. Land holdings, of course, were in Mr. Huntington's hands. In 1911, there occurred the great merger when the Southern Pacific was able to consolidate all these various little things around Southern California. Ah, look at that. Into the Pacific Electric so many of us grew up with. The most spectacular part of the system was this one, Mount Low, the line into the mountains above Altadena, a project which eventually bankrupted Professor Thaddeus Lowe. It was world famous. A trolley took passengers to a terminal deep in Rubio Canyon. I've been there. I remember, I think there's a Boy Scout camp down here in the canyon somewhere, and I think I came up there, and I remember being on that platform, but I never rode the trolley up. A trolley took passengers to this terminal, and an incline car transported them some 1,500 feet up to Echo Mountain, where there was a hotel, which burned down. They always burn down. Where they boarded narrow gauge cars, such as this, to travel over 18 bridges and 127 curves to the Mount Low Tavern. What surprised me, now look at this. Now, you realize they're building things when there's no government pounding them on the head all the time. I mean, what would they think of this? What if that electric system stopped and they had to get out and walk on that? Look at that. Look at those planks. And, I mean, it's kind of out of mind, isn't it? Now, here's a group of people that have been to the tavern. They're set to come down the incline, and wouldn't you think there'd be a smile in the bunch? I mean, look at them. You'd think they had a lousy time. A popular sideline to the freight and passenger business was excursion by trolley. And I wanted to tell you, too, I forgot what you got to say. What surprised me was the travel time from downtown Los Angeles to Mount Low Tavern was 2 hours. That's how quickly they moved. The popular sideline to all this was excursion by trolley. Here's the Green Hotel with the annex on the east side, and the bridge coming across, much like the Huntington's Bridge. This is where the hotels where Easterners gathered in the winter. In Pasadena, it was the Green, like this. The Maryland. This is the Maryland on the northwest corner of Los Robles in Colorado. It also burned down and was rebuilt. And the Raymond burned down twice. I think their stovepipes weren't too cleaned out, where it seemed to always start. And the Wentworth, renamed the Huntington after Mr. Huntington, ran his streetcars up there and developed the land and residential section that you see today there. One could tour the orange groves. Here we are again near the Huntington. Here's out in Convene on the way to Riverside, an Orange Empire special. They had lunch at the Riverside Inn, which also Mr. Huntington had a piece of. One could tour the groves and the missions. You could go to the San Fernando Valley. You could go out on look at this, Cahuenga Pass. This is in the 50s. Look at the traffic. Where did all these guys come from? Look at that. You could go to the beach. This negative happens to be in there backwards. It should be looking the other way. But they did run trolleys down on the beach, and when you get to the end of the Santa Monica Freeway, you do dip through a tunnel down to the Pacific Coast Highway. That tunnel is tile-lined. It is an old trolley tunnel. The most popular site in Southern California was the ostrich farm. Costed. Now, somehow a picture of that got away from me. But when ostrich plumes went out of fashion, the ostrich farm became the alligator farm. And later the alligators were moved to across the street from Knott's Berry Farm. Where they went from there, I don't know. I was the grandson of a sun-kissed grower in Rialto. And my dad didn't like to see young boys, 8, 9, and 10, not employed during the summer, as he was. So I often got sent out there to work in the grove hoeing weeds. And it made me wonder about why the visitors wanted to come out and travel through the groves all the time to look where I had to go to work, you know. I should say at this point that my mother, when I was 6, we lived near the corner of Fremont and today's 10th freeway, 10 freeway. The San Bernardino train came through right there. My mother packed my lunch one day when I was 6, gave me to the conductor in this case, and I rode out to Rialto to spend a week with my grandma. And I guess a lot of people did that. I felt quite at home because I felt quite safe on the streetcars. The height of activity for the system was the mid-20s when it blanketed Southern California from the city of San Fernando to Balboa, from the beaches of Venice to Redlands. Almost 1,200 miles of rails, the largest system in the world. At the same time, popular priced automobiles were appearing, and the public was demanding better roads for themselves and their travels. The trolley tours began fading in favor of bus tours, but there were still specials like this. Specials to the Orange Show, the County Fair, Santa Anita, and the specials, memories now, guys, which delivered hundreds of us kids every year from the car barn on Raymond Avenue to the Catalina Steamer Terminal and on to summer camp. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
I do have to mention one notorious special, and that's this one. When we were all going to South Pasadena High School and some to South Pasadena Junior High, the PE ran a special train which took us over to Fair Oaks, turned up Fair Oaks, and stopped in front of the junior high school. And from there, the high school students could walk uphill to their place, and we walked right in the junior high school. It was an experience all its own. Most of these trains had on board what they call torpedoes. The conductor kept these explosive devices in the locked cupboard. But somehow, the boys managed to get in and pocket a few of these things. Maybe you, Don Lapp, did you do that? Well, these torpedoes were used as warnings. If you put them on the track, as the train started to move, they'd go off, boom, boom, boom. And the motorman would stop the car until the conductor said everything was all right. But the real rascal was the one that learned how to pull the emergency cord inside, because that made a mechanical lock, and it took 4 or 5 minutes to get off the train and undo that one. And if they were really good at it, they could bring the train to a screeching halt, effectively blocking automobile traffic at Atlantic Boulevard. The long-suffering train crews, I think, drew straws for this duty. Well, time-wise, how would you have fared here? In the early PE, if you resided in the Sierra Madre, surrounded by vineyards, backed up by beautiful mountains, citrus orchards, fresh air, and most days a view of Catalina, your travel time to 6th and Main downtown was 52 minutes. And they're making stops on the way. Try that today at 8:30. Pasadena to Los Angeles from Colorado and Fair Oaks was 38 minutes. You live on the beach at Venice, 1 hour and 3 minutes on the Venice Boulevard short line. Or if you had a doctor's appointment over in Hollywood, and there seemed to be quite a congregation of doctors in Hollywood, you could take that way, take the Sunset Boulevard, Santa Monica Boulevard route to Venice, brushing along the south border of the Los Angeles Country Club. hour and 20 minutes. Some of your families, I'm sure, spent time down at Balboa in the summer. The red car went all the way down to the pavilion. Here's the Venice type car. These wooden cars were used quite a bit, some of them built in 1910 and were still running in 1935 and 37. They gave up the idea when at what they called Vineyard Junction, where San Vicente comes in with Venice Boulevard. One of these trains at night ran into the back of another and went about halfway through it and wiped out a few passengers. So they didn't fiddle too much after that with wooden cars. Here's one on the beach. Can you imagine the Coastal Commission approving that? And to keep the thing free of problems, they oiled that sand under the tracks. There's the car at Balboa. The red car went all the way down to the pavilion, just as you see, down the double drive that's still there today. Father, if he spent the weekend with you, could catch the 7 o'clock car on Monday morning and be at 6th and Main by 8:20, unless he stopped at, that gun club down there?
Bolsa Chica.
Bolsa Chica. They had a special car that did stop there. But he'd be in his Spring Street office, because that's where most of them were then, by 8:30. You arrived there at the Pacific Electric Building at 6th and Main, which was headquarters for the system as well as the main terminal for rails that served an eastern arc from Pasadena to Newport Beach. Trains actually entered the building and went through it. It also featured in back a 4-block long elevated track that was supposed to be some 20 blocks long eventually to escape increasing auto traffic, but it never went farther than San Pedro Street. Service to the western arc originated on Hill Street in a crowded little station that backed up to the original Philharmonic on Olive. Do you remember where the original Philharmonic was? Well, if you went down in that basement and went out, you could walk right into this station. A crowded place between 4th and 5th, where they struggled with auto-congested streets to reach their private right-of-way and go to Venice, San Vicente, and the western beach cities. Cars to Hollywood in San Fernando started there also, and they used Hill Street going north through 2 sets of tunnels. Here's the kind of cars they used. We used to call these Hollywood cars. Do you remember that? They went to Hollywood. In the last years of the system, they were used as a shuttle on the Sierra Madre line from here too. Here's a car. Now, I was at this intersection Saturday night. This is the intersection looking south of Hill Street and Temple. Those tunnels aren't there anymore because the hill isn't there anymore. On my right shoulder, or your shoulder, as you look at that, is the Catholic Cathedral today. This train would go by you in the old days and enter another set of tunnels and end up on Sunset Boulevard. Right next door and several stories down was the subway terminal station, an almost mile-long tunnel, in an attempt for the Glendale line to escape downtown traffic. It opened in 1925. It lasted about 25 years. And here it is what it looked like after they used it for the MacArthur film about Corregidor. And you can't see that today. It's completely covered up by housing today. The PE also operated local lines in Pasadena and other communities using these little Bernie cars. These were 040. No wheels, 4 wheels, no wheels. And they rocked along like this. And they went up Lake Avenue, Lincoln Avenue, Fair Oaks, out to Lamanda Park. It was kind of fun riding around on them. They were a one-man operation all over the country, very popular in an attempt to lower costs. Nobody's making any money with these streetcars. There's one of these on display at our county museum carrying Pasadena destination signs of Lincoln Avenue and Lamanda Park. These rattled and rocked all over Pasadena, Redlands, Long Beach in the 20s and 30s. I have to admit, often instead of going right home, I was prone to using up my school book tickets, riding these things to the end of the line and back to see where they went. Well, my mother got used to that, and I wasn't home till 5:45 many times. She knew where I was. The Bernies were abandoned in 1941 by the company in favor of buses, which only made my eccentric travels even more interesting. The big red cars, and this is one of the specials, I think it's when they had a little kitchen on it. It used to run from Newport Beach to the gun club to Los Angeles. They were built by the Pullman Company in some respects and some other big companies. Look at those big rivets on the side. These were tough cars. Some of them weighed up to 120,000 pounds and were pretty fast, 60 miles an hour. Some of them even had a toilet compartment on board. Now that means something to me because my great-grandfather Jefferson was riding the Santa Ana car to Santa Ana to see his daughter when I was about 15. He got as far as Artesia and went into that little toilet compartment and never came out. And they had to stop the car and run it off to a siding and get somebody to take the door off and all this kind of stuff to get him out of that little closet. So it's memorable to me. That's one of my red car experiences. Some of these were brought from Portland, Oregon, and other cities with the Southern Pacific had a similar interest, and were the first to give up on electric interurbans. As a freshman businessman in my obligatory felt hat, I felt quite a part of the business world as I stood in the crowded rocking vestibules of these red cars, trying to read the equally required Herald Express under my arm. I rode the train then up Sierra Madre Boulevard for a ways, and at the first stop above Huntington, where San Marino Avenue splits off to the left, a sign hung down from the trolleys. And the words displayed were words the conductor always called out. He called out Huntington Library Junction, but he said Huntington Library Junction. It was very improper, you know. From my junior high school days, that had puzzled me. There was no junction there. There was no switch. Later I learned, of course, that Mr. Huntington kept private cars, this one the Alabama, which did switch off there and rolled up today's San Marino Avenue to Stratford, a one-block street which still displays the graceful railway curve, which delivered Mr. H to the very gate of his San Marino residence. In the mid-1920s, the PE system scheduled as many as 2,400 trains a day, but the only time it really made positive return was World War II. The system was badly in need of new equipment, never did climb out of that hole, despite trying out various new versions like this one on the Glendale line for a while. The rest of the line was in such ill repair that this thing kept running off the rails on their test runs when they got on our side or the other down in the Western. So they never did buy any more. On the west side, the system tended to use those old wooden cars they purchased back in 1905, but not after that accident they had. By the late 30s, many riders were turning to their cars for transportation. My family amongst them. And our increasing flood of cars was slowing down these interurbans as we crossed their tracks and jammed them up on the street. The company is making money one way, though, by hauling substantial freight trains through their districts. Remember that? They manufactured some of these down in the shops in Torrance instead of buying them off the shelf. These often ran around in the middle of the night using almost silent electric locomotives. Only those of us sneaking home after 1:30 in the morning might be privy to see such a scene as this in the dark, rumbling through San Marino, down Huntington Drive, through Beverly Hills, or even down the middle of Hollywood Boulevard. It was a bright spot, but it couldn't change the trend. Trolleys were definitely on the way out after World War II. There's always been talk in some articles concerning a conspiracy between General Motors, Standard Oil, and Firestone to rid the country of trolleys in favor of buses. I don't doubt that, but these streetcar companies were desperate to get out. And these larger companies, through their national city line stock ownership, gobbled up suffering trolleys all across the country. I think there was one litigation about this, and the damages were assessed at $1. That's how important it became. There were obvious trends for these large companies to respond to in selling their products, but was it much different than the disappearance of manual typewriters? Or how about those 50-pound Frieden calculators we used to carry from one desk to the other? Or those smelly 7-foot-tall copy machines in the hallway? Excuse me. or glass milk bottles. Pacific Electric itself abandoned lines over its lifetime. In Whittier and Fullerton, it quit in 1938. San Bernardino, which started in 1914, was shut down in 41, the link with San Bernardino. Redondo Beach in 1940, and the Oak Knoll line in 1950. But the sharpest blow was the city of Los Angeles demanding the company give up its Aliso Street crossing of the LA River. That's right next to the Union Station. That was the gateway to the entire northern and eastern divisions. Give it up to the relentless march eastward of the Hollywood-San Bernardino Freeway, construction you use today. The division was turned over to buses, and the big Icon trains were gone. A lot of them went to Argentina, and I understand, or Bolivia, and they're still being run down there, but not all of them got away. They were waiting to be scrapped, of course, and somebody was having fun blowing all the windows out.
Are my initials there?
They could be. What remained was sold to the general passenger service, of that service, sold to Metropolitan Coat Lines in 53, I think I have that right. And they went on to prove that public transportation is really not for private enterprise to fiddle with, and gave up to the state-formed Metropolitan Transit Authority, which immediately changed to buses, closed the last rail service, though Bellflower carried on for a little while. And the Long Beach line, the first one to open, was the last to get shut down. Now that doesn't mean it's all disappeared, for reminders are all around us. Old right-of-ways are now walking trails or bicycle trails. Trolley wire supports are on the front of the California Club downtown, and on the front of the Jonathan Club. Sometimes I take the guys that work in those places out front to look at the buildings, and they get a big kick out of it. Say, wow, it really was part of that. My imagination still sees this scene as I drive down Oak Knoll in Pasadena. I took this picture myself on the last day of service in 1950. Right near where you live, Doctor, right? A 1903 waiting bench at Fair Oaks in Columbia. There's another one down the hill at the stop across from the shopping center, too.
Oaklawn.
Where Oaklawn used to come over. Yeah, you can walk it, but not anything else. I used to ride the bike across that bridge. Whoops, that was pretty good. There are double drives, of course, here in San Marino. One in western South Pasadena that's leading to York Boulevard. And you can ride them today. Oh, here's one. I get an old movie and watch Cheryl Lloyd fuss around on the streetcars. I like that pose. Look at them all. They get everything's. You can just see the whole story trying to, like they do in Mexico, he's trying to ride around with a turkey in his lap. And you can ride them today. There's two of these cars operating, if they're still doing it now, in San Pedro on 1.5 miles of track. That particular car, I have a picture of that car on rubber tires. And one day I was at the intersection of California and Fair Oaks, years after the tracks had been pulled. I hear a very familiar sound. It's the toot of the PE and the clang of the bell, and here's this thing sitting in the middle of Fair Oaks. It was very startling, and the guy is driving it up Fair Oaks Avenue. I would recommend you go out to Paris if you want to see these streetcars, the red cars or the yellow cars. They've got, 2 miles of track, and you can ride them out there. There's the old Vermont type car. Reminders around, I found this out in the desert. I'm out in the eastern Riverside County, still there. That was invented by the PE, if I'm not mistaken. And I recommend, if you want to read about it, some wonderful books, as it says here, compiled by he got it misspelled there. Compiled by Donald Duke, who's left us. But he has some great books on it. And a wonderful book that I bought with Henry Huntington and the Creation of Southern California. It's a publisher parage type book from Ohio State, but it's wonderful reading. It's very thorough. It's rather rare, but you can see it get it on Amazon perhaps. And the books by Jim Walker and others. There's one that I saw at the Pasadena Art Museum recently, Pasadena History Museum, called Pacific Electric Then and Now. And that's a wonderful book, and those two gentlemen who wrote that are giving shows around Southern California. They're worth looking at. The employee situation that there was, it was typical that people stayed for years. Their early pay was 24 cents an hour. But then bread was 5 cents a loaf or something like that too, or less. I wanted to show you this. Now this machine I've got there, where'd that thing go? Right here. Is it, I want to be sure, I've got a sound for you. Those of you who rode on Pacific Electric are going to recognize what you hear. Now this is the close of my talk. This is about 20 seconds. And what it is, a Pacific Electric car, somebody sat on it in late 1940s and made a recording of the car starting up with a toot and then the crossing blow they typically gave, then the terrific clatter as it crosses a switch section, and then slowing down for the next station. Now let's see if it's on. Could you put up the light a little bit? Is that possible? Yeah. That's it. Thanks for listening.
We've got time. You want to respond to a few questions?
If I can answer them, yeah.
Oh, I'm sure. Well, questions?
There was a period of time after the trolleys quit, and they put electric buses. You remember those? You didn't get any pictures of those.
They don't interest me.
Good answer.
I do have at home. This is Richard Seaver, a very philanthropic family. Richard Seaver and I were having breakfast one morning.
Just unlike.
There's a,
People in the back can't hear it.
Okay. Richard Seaver of that philanthropic family in Los Angeles, he's the late Richard Seaver, and I were having breakfast one morning in Los Angeles, and I happened to mention that over on Figueroa Street they were digging up, we were at the California Club, and they're digging up a block away the old railroad ties on Figueroa. And he said, let's go over there and get a spike. So the two of us went over there, and I thought, boy, wouldn't that have been something to report? Here's this very prominent guy, and we're walking down through the rubble on the street, through the rubble looking for a spike. I have one at home. His son-in-law sits next to me, Dorn Dean, at breakfast. And I mentioned to Dorn I had that spike, and he says, I know where the other one is.
This was a heavily regulated industry, as I understand it, and a lot of the lines they wanted to shut down early because they had to get permission from regulators.
They had to get permission to abandon the lines, that's
and often
right.
had been losing money on the line for years and years before that came through.
Well, it became that way. It wasn't that way to start, but it became that way. It was pretty easy to start. And later on, regulation just kept growing like that, and they did run into that. But they didn't seem to have much trouble, like in Pasadena, just outright quitting and putting in buses. And they left the car tracks in the street.
What were the fares, and did it vary according to distance that you covered?
Yes, I had that in my head. I don't at the moment, but it certainly wasn't expensive. Although for the time it might have been. But the trains were packed usually. The station at 6th and Main was absolutely packed at 6 and 6:30 in the evening. In fact, those of you who remember the Jack Benny show,
Yeah.
Azusa and Kamanga, that all came from the 6th and Main station. where the guy would roll the gate back and he'd call it Ballroom Park, Covina, San Dimas, all that, and he'd get to Etowanda and Cucamonga and go, that's where all that funny stuff came from.
What was the name of the author that you recommended, the first book? Do you remember? his name?
Fredericks, Donald Duke.
Donald
A
Duke.
San Marino resident who spent years cataloging all this stuff, and his writings are excellent. I bought his books up at the Whistle Stop in Pasadena on Colorado and Santa Anita.
You know they have reproductions of the red cars now at Disney's California Adventure.
I heard that. I haven't been out there. I would certainly recommend, I don't think I've said this before, but that you visit the Orange Empire Railway Museum in Paris, California. It'll take you about an hour and 20 minutes to get there. And they're operating streetcars. Some of these pictures I showed you are from there. And they're operating them. You can get on and ride around.
Do you know what they've done to the subway tunnel?
It's blocked out completely, and it's blocked out. And on the last I saw of the entrance, it was solid, but it had painted on it a red car as if it were coming out of the tunnel.
So the tunnel's not used for anything?
It's just closed off.
Is it true that they had a track that ran up off Huntington to the home, to their home?
That's the one I described. The one at the where Sierra Madre Boulevard splits off from San Marino Avenue, and you can go up the left side of San Marino. The tracks. It started with construction of his home, and the track went up there and turned in on that curving street, and went into the gate first for building supplies. But later on, he had a small train yard sitting on Oxford. Before Oxford was there. Yeah.
Any other questions? Look over there.
You mentioned the Lincoln, the Monda Park Bernie car,
Yeah,
and it's exhibited at what county museum?
it's at the LA County, museum.
Okay.
And there are cars like that running out in Paris, California.
That's the one on Washington. Blackmont?
Excuse me?
Which county? There's a lot of county museums.
No, the County Museum at Exposition Park.
Oh, okay.
Jim?
Yeah, Jeff, do you see the red cars and metro cars coming back in any density like they were before in 1920?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I mean, they're having so much trouble putting in a line wherever they want to go and arguing, and it's like trying to finish the 110 freeway. Long ago, a friend of mine, Ed Telford, was in charge of designing the freeway system in Southern California, and he said it's like a refinery plumbing system, pipes all over it, and if it's all flowing, it works. But he says people are going to object to this year after year, and eventually it won't really work very well. And that's what we've got today. And the same thing I think is true obvious that the Glendale Freeway should turn on its south end instead of going downhill into that, what is it? On the south, yeah. It should have gone out Santa Monica Boulevard, turned and gone through the hill. And the original one, that freeway was planned for that, and there was going to be rail cars underneath. I think Ed Telford told me, but it didn't happen.
Well, one more big round of applause.
Thank you.
Good job, Jeff.
Is that all right?
Appreciate everybody coming out. 4 weeks from tonight, same room, same time. We're going to hear from Nick Curry and talking in the Guggenheim and their role in the early founding of JPL and Aerojet and the Guggenheim Aeronautical Laboratory at Caltech. So please join us then, and glad to see a good crowd. Yes, sir.
Where is it?